Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. So we're picking up, for those who weren't here yesterday or previous shiurim, we're picking up Daf Chaf Vav and with Bet. Masechet Beitzah. We are discussing, we're moving on to sort of a new topic. We've been discussing the last few shiurim. We saw the case in the Mishnah regarding Bikur Mumim on Yom Tov, regarding whether you have a Bechor and whether you're allowed to go and inspect it for a Mum on Yom Tov, right? You go to the mumche, and he's allowed to tell you if it's a mum. He can tell you if it's a mum kavua versus a mum over, and what you can do with that bechor. We saw different parameters, different cases. Machlok Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda. Machlok, what happens if the mum was there from before Yom Tov? What if the mum is only there on Yom Tov? Right, ramifications for muktzah, etc. So I won't repeat all of that, but I refer you to the shiurim if you, which are all available on YouTube. But that's what we've been discussing. And now, based on that, the Gemara is going to use this as part of a proof for a new discussion. So we're about halfway down, on Chaf Vav Amud Bet, where the Gemara says, we ask a question. Right, we say, about halfway down, Bai mine Hillel me Rava. Yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat? Or ein muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat? Question is there such a concept of muktzeh for half of Shabbat? Again, as we spoke yesterday, muktzeh means something that is set aside, something that is not designated for use on Shabbat. So the question is, what if it wasn't designated, it wasn't fit for use for part of Shabbat? Does it remain muktzeh for the rest of Shabbat? For example, let's say you have laundry, right, hanging out on the line, and it's very, very, very wet. So there's nothing you can do with it. It's very, very wet. It's not ra'oi. That would be muktzeh. But when it dries, it is right. If it was just a little bit damp when you hang it out at the beginning, and sometimes people can take clothes which are a little bit damp and they can wear them, so that would not be muktzeh. But let's assume that it's very, very wet. So again, you can't. That is muktzeh at the beginning of Shabbat. When it dries, at that point it's not muktzeh. But do we say that since it's already been muktzeh when Shabbat came in, therefore we don't say muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat? Have a look at Rashi. Rashi on the right hand side of the page, because Rashi here is on both sides. He says, "Yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat, mishum chetzi Shabbat, im huktzeh bechetzio miave muktzeh lekulei Shabbat im lo." If it's right designated as something that has no use for part of Shabbat, so do we say that it's designated for the whole of Shabbat as well? So says the Gemara, okay, heichidami. What's the case? Yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat or ein muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat? Heichidami. What's that case? Ida ichzi bein hashmashot ichzi. Ida lo ichzi, lo ichzi. Right, meaning, says the Gemara at this point, I don't understand the question. Right, we go by whatever it is, a bein hashmashot. Bein hashmashot, obviously on Friday afternoon, evening, right, when Shabbat comes in, if it's fit for, that's what determines whether it's going to be muktzeh or not. See Rashi. Rashi says, Echidami, says Michdi, Stam muktzeh hainu gogarot utzimukin shemaoleh otan amanat leyabshan. Okay, the quintessential example of muktzeh is you have gogarot utzimukim, you have sort of raisins, grapes that you put out onto the roof in order to dry, right? You're preparing those raisins. So that's the definition of something which you've set aside. You have no use for it now. You're going to wait for it until they've dried out and they become raisins, and you can and then you can eat them. So that's a type of muktzeh, grugarot tzimokin, that even now we know we have machloket Rabbi Dan, Rabbi Shimon. Everybody agrees grugarot tzimokin, that is muktzeh. So he says, stam muktzeh hainu grugarot tzimokin shemaoleh otan amad liabshan umaktzeh otan lakach. You set them aside for this. You designate them. That's what the word muktzeh means. Once you start drying them out, once they start drying out, you can't eat them until they have dried out completely. In other words, what's the shaila? Meaning, so then he says, if they had, you'd put them out earlier and they'd finished drying out by the time you get to Ben Hashmashot, by the time Shabbat begins, so then they're fit to eat, then you can eat them, and there's no question. There's no Chatzi Shabbat. V'idelo achzu, Ben Hashmashot. But if at Ben Hashmashot they were not yet ready to be eaten, so Vaday Sulin, De'ein kan hachana mibod yom. So then obviously they'll be asur, because what is hachana as opposed to muktzeh mean? That when Shabbat comes in, that you have in mind that you're able to use it. The one who holds that there's muktzah and there's hachana, so it needs to be done mibod yom. You remember that way back. We know that much close to the beginning of the Masechet, right? Hachana de Rabbah. Okay, so lo tzricha, says the Gemara. Let's go back into the Gemara now before we carry on with Rashi. He says, so the Gemara said like this: it said yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat or ein muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. So echida miidach si ben eshmashot ichsi, either lo ichsi, right? Lo tzricha. No, this is the case that you need it for. The following case: tzricha de ichsi v'hadal idchi. Meaning, again, if it wasn't fit for use on at Ben Hashmashot, we're saying obviously, so it's muktzeh. The point is this: it wasn't muktzeh at Ben Hashmashot. It's saying at Ben Hashmashot ichsi, that was fit for use. Afterwards, for whatever reason, something happened itchi, and then it became what would have been muktzeh, and then afterwards it became fit for use again. So that's our question regarding Chatzi muktzah or muktzah lechatzi Shabbat, right? So here Rashi says, explains lo tzricha de ichzu. Okay, we're now on the left-hand side. Rashi, he says ben hashmashot ve'itchu b'Shabbat shnefla aleim gshamim. Let's say there was a large amount of rain on Shabbat. V'tapchu, and they got soaked. V'hadal achzu, and then afterwards they became fit again. Sheshavtan hashemesh. The sun came out and dried them out, so now they are. In other words, the point is this: when the beginning of Shabbat they were not muktzeh, but on Shabbat they became muktzeh. So the question is, once it becomes muktzeh on Shabbat, do we say it's now going to be muktzeh automatically for the rest of Shabbat? Or do we say no, only for the time that it can't use it, and then afterwards goes back to its original state? Okay, so that's our question. That's our question. So back in the Gemara we said, so So what is the case? Meaning, what is the din, I should say? So yesh muktzeh. So he answers back, he says, yes, it's muktzeh. Meaning, what do you mean by that when you say, right? Yesh muktzeh, meaning yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. In other words, once it becomes muktzeh in the middle of Shabbat, it's going to stay muktzeh for the rest of Shabbat. So we say now, that's what Rava says. So he answers back, itvei, with the following challenge: V'shavin she'im nolad umumo imo shezeh min hamuchan. Okay, so now we're back to our sugya. This is the connection. Now, what we saw before this was the following. We saw a question. We saw Machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. What happens if you have a Bechor which has a mum on Yom Tov? So we saw three different cases. We saw there is the case where the Bechor gets as the mum from before Yom Tov. There is the case where the Bechor has the mum on Yom Tov. And there is the case where the Bechor is born on Yom Tov with the mum. So we said like this. We said that, at least according to the stringent opinion, we said that if the mum if there is no mum before Yom Tov, right? So the Bechor was essentially muktzeh. The Bechor was essentially muktzeh in your mind. You never had in mind that you could do anything with it because you can only use it. You can only shecht it if it has a mum. And since there was no mum at all, so that's not going to be allowed. And then we said even the case of where there was a mum from Erev Yom Tov. The case was you had a mum from Erev Yom Tov, but you didn't have time, or you weren't able to go to a Bechor to check. It was a mum kavua or a mum over. So even then, we saw an opinion that said no. So then on Yom Tov as well, you didn't have in mind it's lo min hamuchan. Okay, so those two cases we were going to be more stringent. We saw the third case where everybody was more lenient was if the Bechor is born with the mum on Yom Tov. Okay, we had a discussion we discussed yesterday. Do we say in such a case you can go and you can check for the mum lekatchila or not? But everybody agrees that in such a case, b'di'evid, it's okay. In other words, b'di'evid, it's not muktzeh. So he has the question. He says like this. right? Everybody says that if the Bechor is born on Yom Tov with a mum, right? Nolad umumo imo, shezem min hamuchan, that is considered min hamuchan. That is considered that it's not muktzeh. So v'amai neima hai b'chol meikala havachazi agav imei idyalid le idchile achazi lechacham shtali le. In other words, what are you saying? Surely this is the case. This is exactly parallel to our case of something which was not muktzeh, and then it becomes muktzeh, and then it becomes unfit for use, and then it becomes fit for use again. Now, question is, once it becomes unfit, do we say it's now muktzeh for the rest of Shabbos? So those three stages are actually parallel in the situation of the Bechor. That's what he's saying, right? And my name, let's say, Hi Bechor Meikala V'Chazi. Initially, we say that this Bechor was Chazi, was Ra'ui, was not considered Muktzeh, because Agav Imei, because of its mother, right? That's what we saw this coming earlier in the Masechet as well. Have a look at Rashi. Rashi says here at the top, it wasn't born yet, right? But we say it's okay. Why? Since it was still inside the mother, and you could have shechted the mother, therefore it's okay. Whether it was a tam, whether it was a ba'amum, doesn't matter. The kedusha of the bechor only applies once it is born, not when it's still inside me'imo. So therefore, at the beginning of Shabbat, we say it was ra'ui, agavimo. It yalid le idchile, but then once it becomes born, right, on Shabbat, so now it's a bechor. So if it's a bechor tam, then it's going to be muktzeh. And even if it's not, even if it's got a Baal Mum, until you've shown it to the Chacham, there's not really anything you can do. So we say idchile, says Rashi, shabachizkat b'chol tam v'asur ad shirei mumo. Right, until you've shown the mum, then it's still it's not min hamuchan. And then achazia lechacham ishtal le'ai. So once you show it to the chacham, now we say it's going to be ra'ui, right? But so those three stages, that's exactly what we said. It's exactly what we said before. We said bein hashmashot ichzi, and then right the ichzi v'hada idchi v'hada ichzi. So same thing. Bein hashmashot, it was okay. It was you could shecht it agavimo. Then you could not once it was born, and then once you shown to the chacham, then yes. So shouldn't we say, because that middle stage already there it is now defined as muktzeh for the rest of Shabbat or the rest of Yom Tov. So what's the answer? So Amar Abaye V'itei Rav Safra. Sorry. I'm skipping. Yeah, hang on. So we said like this, right? V'amai neima hai b'chol meikala v'chazi agav imei. It yared le itchile chazi lechacham ishtali le. So Amar Abaye v'itei Rav Safra. You're going to see it says it twice, and then I was looking at the wrong line because it says it twice in the Gemara because we could have a sort of ikad amri here. But we said Amar Abaye v'itei Rav Safra kegon the yatvi daine hatam. So he says, no, actually it all happened straight away. What does it mean? What's the case? When the yatvi daine hatam, the dainim were sitting there. The dainim were sitting there when this bechor was born. And and as soon as it was born, they saw the mum straight away and they allowed it. So it actually means that there was never the stage where it became muktzeh. Rashi says over here, the yatve daine hatam, the dainim was saying of the kshenolad, uchepoto et alecha, when it was born and it came through the womb, meaning straight away when it came through the womb, they saw the mum, and therefore there was never a stage where we would say it was muktzah. Okay, so that is the first version of that explanation, meaning we bring it as a challenge. We bring it as a challenge to say we should say that there is no muktzah for Chatzi Shabbat, and then we answer, no, this doesn't actually prove it because it's not similar to the case we're talking about. So now says the Gemara Ika de Amri, a different version, a different report of how this took place. So the first version is where we say there is muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat, and then we try and disprove that from this case. Yeah, it's the other way around. Ika de Amri, Amale ein muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. Here he says no, there is no muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. Okay, meaning once it's become muktzeh for part of Shabbat, once it's rawei again, that's fine. So leima masayle. So let's bring as a proof, as a support that there is no muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat, and the following case: v'shavin she'im noladu mumoyimo shezeh min hamuchan. Right? What the fact that everybody agrees that the bechor is born and has a mum, that it's min hamuchan and it's not considered muktzeh, that is seemingly a proof that there is no muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. Why? Because it's the same three stages that we said. Exactly the same thing. At the beginning, it was considered mukhan through because you could do shech demada, right? And then it was born, so now it's considered lo min mukhan, and now you show it to the chacham, and it's okay. So again, the same answer. Right, that they were sitting there and they saw. So again, it's both times it's the same answer, and we reject the comparison to our case of muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. The difference is in the first case we're trying to bring it to disprove, and the second case we're trying to bring, in the second account we're trying to bring it to prove. But either way, we cannot prove one way or another from this case. Okay, so we still have our question of what do we say regarding muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. So now we try and bring another proof, another braita. So he's like this, Tashma. Right, it says the following: Haya ochel ba'anavim v'hotil ve'elan lagag lasot mehem tzimukim bateinim v'hotil ve'elan lagag lasot mehen gurogalot. Okay, so what's the case? Well, the person was eating grapes, and he has too many grapes, and he decides, okay, he's going to leave. He's got some left over. He's going to take them up to his roof. He's going to put them, dry them out to be raisins. Or he was eating figs, right? And he was going to leave them out to make rogarot, which are dried figs. Again, so both of these cases, says the Braita, lo yochal mehen ad sheyazmin min be'od yom. Okay. So yeah, again, it's not necessarily that he started eating on Shabbat. He started eating beforehand, but he has them left over and he puts them up. He puts them up on the roof. It says so he should not eat from those. Meaning he shouldn't eat from them on Shabbat. He needs to go from before Shabbat and he needs to be mazmin. He needs to set them aside and say that he's going to eat them. And so do the same thing with lots of different types of fruits. Okay, so before we see exactly what the proof is, we should go try to understand precisely what is the case. What are we dealing with here? So says the Gemara, Hechidami. What is the case of the Braita? Ida chazu lama le'azmana. Ida lo chazu azminu may have. Okay, so the first, the case was you put these fruits, you're leaving them up on the roof in order to dry. Okay, we're saying they're going to be muktzeh unless you go and you do hazmana. Hazmana before, meaning actively you go and you designate that you want to partake of these on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, I don't understand the case. If they are, again, remember the process. First, at the beginning, these are ordinary grapes, right? They're fit to eat. Once they start drying out, okay, then they're in that process, then they're not going to be ro'ei l'achila. At that point, they would be muktzeh. But once they finish, then they would be fit to eat again. So I don't understand. If you put them there and they are still fit to eat, meaning the process hasn't really started yet. So why do you need hazmanah? They're not muktzeh. If you've put them there and they've already started, so they're not fit to eat. So what's hazmanah going to help you? Meaning they're already muktzeh. That's like Masa doesn't make sense. If they're fit, if they're ra'oi l'achila, right? Why do you need hazmanah? Either lo chazun, if they're not fit for achila, ki hazmin lo mayave. So what is hazmanah going to help you? V'chiteima De lo yada ichazu ilo chazu. So you're going to say, okay, well maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he left them up on the roof and he's not sure yet, right, if they are fit to be eaten or not fit to be eaten. V'amar Rav Kahana muktzeh she'avash ve'enam abalim makilim bo mutar. But didn't Rav Kahana say the following thing? Right? Didn't we say that if you have a fruit essentially which is muktzeh, right, which you went to dry out before Shabbat, and the owners did not know that it had already dried out. I mean, they didn't go and check it; they didn't know that it already dried out. So nonetheless, it's mutar. It's mutar without without hazmana, because essentially what we're saying is that it was fit. It was fit to be eaten. So that doesn't make. So that doesn't seem to make sense. So rather, what do we say? El alav dechazu v'adchu v'hadal achzu. So we have to say the case of right is as follows: that hazu, meaning that they were fit to be eaten, v'idchu, and then they became right. They started drying out, and they were not fit to be eaten, and then and then we say, and then they became fit to be eaten again, right? The chazu ve'ilchu v'hadach. V'i amalt ein muktzeh lamalu azmana. If you're going to say that there is no muktzeh for chatzi Shabbat, why do you have to do the hazmana? Ela mai yesh muktzeh. You have to say there's a muktzeh. In other words, this bright is exactly the proof that this seems to be. This is exactly the case whereby we say that there would be muktzeh for Chatzi Shabbat, meaning at the beginning of, and that's why you have to do the Hazmana. Why do you have to go and do the Hazmana? Why do you have to go and designate these fruits? Because yes, at the beginning of Shabbat, they are fit to be eaten. They're not muktzeh right now, but over the course of Shabbat, they're going to become muktzeh and they're non-muktzeh, right? So therefore, if I would just leave it, if I say yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat, if I would just leave it now, then once it enters that stage on Shabbat, that's going to be a problem. But if I do the designation before Shabbat, then that would be okay. Right? That seemingly would be the proof to say that yesh muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat. Right? Lav dechadu v'ad v'achzu. Amart ein muktzeh lama lo azmana elamai yesh muktzeh. We'd have to say that there. So let's see Rashi until this point. Let's go back up a little bit from before when we started asking the question about how the Braita works. He said, Ide achzu. Rashi maybe a third of the way down from the top on the left-hand side. It says, Ide achzu ben eshmashot. And if they were fit at ben eshmashot, lama li azmana. Then why do we ask the question, why do we need azmana? Vadai. Kevan dechazabu de yavshu. Since they are fit because they've already dried out, that we right, one has them in mind, one has them designated. They were only set aside when you muktzeh in order to dry them out. And if they were not fit, or they started drying out but not enough, so what would the hazmana actually help you? You can't eat them. Hazmana is not going to, it's going to be meaningless. It's like if you take stones and sticks and you say, I'm setting these aside to eat. You can't do that. It's like if you try and accept Shabbat before Plaga Mincha. It just doesn't work. There's nothing there. And if you would have said like this, the Torah hulo la'alot alehen, v'lirot im yavshu lav. We would have said maybe he doesn't know. Maybe it's difficult for him to now go and get up onto the roof and go see if they've dried out or not dried out. Right? It's last hour before Shabbos, and you've got so much to do, and it's a Shatzat Chak, especially because it's like Ba'omer Shechal Be'ev Shabbat, and you have to go and shave, and you've got all sorts of things to do, right? You don't have time to go up and check on the roof. You do the hazmana, is prepare. You say, I'm going to set them aside, I'm going to eat from them on tomorrow. Imruinen. This is a havamina, right? Vashmeinan. Ilav de azminu me'etmol. כיוון דלא הווה ידע שאין אלוהים, לא ואמרים דעתי להווה, we would have said that's because you didn't know, so we can't say that in your mind you had designated them to eat because you didn't know that they were fit yet. ואסורים לאכול אפילו מצען אלוהים, even if now on Shabbat you'll come and you'll find them and they've dried out and they're fit to eat, but you didn't have that in mind. So then we said, Rav Kahana said, no, that's not the way it works. Amar Rav Kahana muktzeh shel glogolot atzimukin sheyabash mi'ba'od yom. Right, you have muktzah of these raisins or figs that have dried out before Shabbat. Ve'ena ba'alin ma'kilin bo, and the owners don't know, they didn't realize. Ena ba'alim yodim shabash shelo badku mi'ba'od yom. They didn't check it before Shabbat. U'lemachar matz'u sheyabash haya me'etmol, sheyavesh haya me'etmol. And on Shabbat you find that it was already since yesterday. So we say mutar. That's permitted because you only set them aside in order to be dried out. And that's happened. Okay, that was how Rav Chai explains. That's the statement of Rav Kahana. That's what we say at the end of the day. Al-kochach lo mituk ma'achazmana ilav la'achli. Right, this case of Azmana we're talking about in the Braita is only for the following case. The Azminu, the im yidchu lemachar v'yitaknu labo b'yom yochal mehen. That right now they offered, right now you could go and eat them, but if for whatever reason they're going to become lo ra'oi tomorrow over the course of Shabbat, then when they become back to being fit, being edible, that they are going to be in your mind already from now. And therefore you are right, and therefore you're going to set them aside. Okay, so Adkan. So now the question is, if that's the case, right? If that's the case, where we're setting them aside, is that going to be a proof? Is that going to be a proof for us that we have muktzeh lechatzi Shabbat or not? Okay. So we'll stop. So we'll stop it there. We'll pick it up there from the explanation of the Braita and the attempted proof and the next attempted proof, etc. We'll pick that up next week at the bottom of the Amud. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.